as you can see, today is going to be on blue-tongued skinks. This is Chancho, my Indonesian classic blue-tongued skink, and I'm not going to hold him for the entire video because he absolutely hates being held and he's super upset right now. But this is him. He's still growing, he's still a baby, but he's super cute. And today we're going to talk all about him. So when you think of a blue-tongued skink, there's actually many different subspecies of blue-tongued skinks. The most common that people own are the northern blue-tongued skinks. I happen to have an Indonesian, which is a classic, but again, there are so many different subspecies, so it's important to make sure that you know which one you have. All of the Indonesians are going to get a little bit larger and require a higher humidity level than the northerns. So that's something that you really need to pay attention to. Other than that, the care is pretty much exactly the same and there's nothing else to worry about. But again, you do want to make sure that that humidity level is spot on so that way your animal doesn't get sick. So today I will be covering the Indonesian blue-tongued skink, and they have the higher humidity level, so that's what I will be covering. So first of all, blue-tongued skinks are so adorable. They're becoming more popular in the pet trade. They are a little bit more expensive and a little bit more difficult to find. If you're looking for a great blue-tongued skink to own as a pet, I highly recommend going to reptile shows because that is one of the only places that you'll see them other than like a reptile shop. They can be a little bit hard to come by. They are never going to be sold at like a Petco or PetSmart, not that I know of at least. And you wouldn't want to be getting them from there anyway, so don't really have to worry about that. But they are kind of expensive. They're usually around $300 to $400. They can get more expensive depending on the morphs, especially within the northerns. There's a lot of variety of the colors and patterns, so the price does get upped for those. But generally you're looking at about $300 to $400 for a blue-tongued skink. Another thing, when you're getting a blue-tongued skink, a lot of the Indonesians, such as the classic that I own, is a wild caught. If you do want a pet, I highly recommend getting captive bred. I wasn't aware that mine was wild caught when I got him. He was from LLL Reptiles at Tinley actually. It was just the NARBC huge reptile show. And I wasn't aware because there was no label or anything, and basically if there's no label saying that they are captive bred, it means that they are wild caught, so that's something to pay attention to. I always recommend getting captive bred just because you don't know if your animal can be sick and carrying parasites or mites or anything. Chancho was treated. He's perfectly healthy and in good condition. He's a little feisty. It could be because he's wild caught, but honestly, blue-tongued skinks as babies are a little feisty generally. But I'm going to cover that a little later. So the main thing with blue-tongued skinks that I think is just amazing is obviously they have that blue tongue that they stick out, which is so adorable, and that just melts your heart. They're just the cutest things ever. And it's really interesting because that is their only defense in the wild other than running away. So blue-tongued skinks, they literally just stick out that blue tongue, and it's basically to ward off predators because it's supposed to make the predators think that that blue tongue means that they're poisonous. So it's supposed to make the predators not want to eat them. So it's just hilarious because they literally just stick out that blue tongue and they're hoping that they're being fierce and scaring off the predators. And it's just adorable, and they aren't poisonous or anything. So it's all just a trick, but it's just amazing. I think it's really cool and adorable. Another thing that I love about blue-tongued skinks is their bodies. Their bodies are so unique. They're like this big, thick hot dog, and I think that they're the corgis of the lizard world because they have these really big, long bodies, but then they have tiny, short, little legs, and it's just so hilarious and so adorable. So yes, they are the corgis of the lizard world. So on average for a blue-tongued skink, you're looking at 2 feet when they're full grown. As babies, they're much smaller, but they do get to be pretty large as adults, and you want to keep that in mind because they will require a larger enclosure as they get older as well. Another thing to be aware of before getting one is to realize that they do live 20+ years. So that is a very long commitment. You want to make sure that you're willing to take in an animal and keep it for its entire lifespan before committing to getting one. So as I said, they do get large, so you do want to make sure that you have the appropriate enclosure for them. As an adult, the minimum size enclosure that you should have is a 4 by 2 by 2. Again, you can go much larger. They definitely roam around and enjoy the space, so I highly recommend getting as big as you possibly can. As well as in the enclosure, you want to provide a lot of hiding places, just so that way they can feel safe and secure, especially if you're putting a baby in a larger enclosure. They definitely need to feel secure so that way they aren't stressed out and they're still eating and healthy. When it comes to the substrate, there are many different things you can use. Because I'm talking about Indonesians and they require that higher level humidity, I actually use Eco Earth because it retains that humidity really well, and it also works really well when you mist it. It's not going to get gross or anything, and it just holds and retains that humidity that the skink needs. Another way to increase the humidity for your blue tongue skink is to provide a very large water bowl. I actually haven't seen my lizard ever drink out of the water bowl. I don't know if he does it secretly or what the case is, but I have noticed that when I mist his enclosure down, he actually licks the moisture off of the leaves, similar to my geckos or my chameleons. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Again, that humidity needs to be very high, so you need to be spraying the enclosure down. I do it every morning and every night, and that seems to work just fine for Chancho. And as I keep bringing up the humidity level, you do want to be 60 and 90%, which is very, very high. It can be intimidating to new owners that aren't familiar with the upkeep of a high humidity enclosure. So again, that's something to keep in mind. If you think that that's too challenging, but you still want a blue tongue skink, then you should definitely get a northern instead, because they won't be requiring that super high level of humidity. And again, with the water that you're going to be misting and in the water bowl, you do want to use ReptiSafe just to be extra cautious and make sure that there's no chlorine within the water. So there's a lot of controversy when it comes to the type of upkeep within your enclosure, whether or not you want to use a heating pad or over the head lighting. And I actually started out with the heating pad, and I would also offer UVB. Again, that's not something that is required with blue tongue skinks. A lot of people keep blue tongue skinks within racking systems with a heat pad and no UVB, and they claim that it works out just fine. But I personally have noticed that my skink is much happier and much more active with UVB and the above head lighting rather than the heat pad, because I started out with the heat pad and he would just be hiding all day and not really doing anything. And then I switched out the lighting and gave him a heat lamp on top, and he actually was extremely happy. He basks like he's a bearded dragon, like he absolutely loves it, and he's way more active. And I just think that it's much healthier for your skink to supply them with that overhead lighting and definitely give them that UVB. So because the UVB is not required, you do want to use a tropical UVB. You don't want to use the desert because that's going to be way too much for your skink. You just want to do a very low wattage UVB for them, but you should still offer it just because it is just better for their health. When it comes to the temperature, no matter if you are using the under the tank heating pad or over the head lamp, you do want to make sure that that hot spot reaches 86 to 90 degrees for blue tongue skinks. And then you do want ambient temperature of 70 to 78 degrees for them as well. So when it comes to the diet for blue tongue skinks, that's another thing that people absolutely love about them because they eat so much food. It's just like such a big variety. So they are omnivores. So typically for a blue tongue skink, you want it to be 50% vegetables and then 40% protein and then 10% fruits. So when it comes to like the vegetable matter, I basically just go off of whatever you can feed your bearded dragon is safe for blue tongue skinks as well. So when I say that, I mean like dandelion greens, collard greens, mustard greens, bok choy, all of those are totally safe. You don't want to be using iceberg lettuce or romaine because it doesn't offer very many vitamins and nutrients for your animal, so you don't want to really do that. All it is basically water. So you want to be giving them a lot of vitamins and nutrients, and those really dark leafy greens are where they're going to get all of that. Some things that you should avoid for sure are citrusy foods such as like oranges or lemons. Stay away from that. No tomatoes. You also do want to make sure that you don't feed them avocado. Avocado is very toxic for reptiles, so you don't want to be offering that to your skink. When it comes to the protein, there are so many different things you can do. So when you have a smaller baby Indonesian blue-tongued skink, it's recommended that within the first year you use cat food, and you want to be using like a really good healthy brand. I use Wellness. I use the chicken or the turkey flavor, and that usually works out just fine. After a year you can start feeding them the dog food, and that works out pretty good. There are, again, so many other options. They eat eggs as well, and I actually just gave him quail eggs for the first time, and I will show you at the end of this video his first time eating a quail egg. It's so entertaining, but that's another great source of protein, and the shell is actually a good source of calcium as well. And then when it comes to the fruits, that's basically just an additional snack. Apples, cantaloupe, watermelon, there's so many different things you can do. Just try to avoid the citrusy fruits as much as you can. So when it comes to the supplementation, if you are not using UVB for your blue-tongued skink, then it is very imperative that you are using calcium D3 to supplement on all of the food that you'll be feeding your blue-tongued skink. If you are using UVB for your blue-tongued skink, then you should offer calcium D3 at least twice a month, and then all of the other feedings you'll be doing calcium without D3, just because you don't want them to overdose on that D3. And then at least twice a month you should also be using a multivitamin and dusting everything with that as well. Something I forgot to cover is, obviously, these animals also eat insects. They eat everything. So again, dubia roaches, superworms, crickets, all of them you should be dusting with the supplementation that's needed. You should also be gut loading them as well, just to provide that extra nutrients that they need. So when it comes to how much you should feed and how often you should feed your blue-tongued skink, if you have a brand new baby, you should be feeding it every single day. As they get older, you can slow down a little bit with the feeding. When they're about 3 months old, you can feed them every other day, and then after 6 months, you can feed them every 3 days. And you do want to make sure that you're not overfeeding your blue-tongued skink, because they can get obese, and you don't want that. That's very unhealthy for them. They have very slow metabolisms, so they're very, very heavy-bodied lizards, and you don't want to be making them overfed whatsoever. So just keep an eye on it and just try to stick to a schedule. I find that that's what works best. When you have a fully grown adult blue-tongued skink, you can feed them once a week. Just make sure it's a very, very healthy, good meal, and that should be fine for them. So when it comes to the handleability with blue-tongued skinks, they're actually known for being like super tame, super docile, very easy to handle, especially as adults. But the babies are known to be pretty feisty, and it takes time for them to adjust, and Chancho is definitely still in that phase where he just does not want to be touched whatsoever, and he absolutely can't stand it. They aren't very easy to handle compared to like a bearded dragon. I think that they shouldn't be labeled as a beginner lizard just because they aren't as easy to handle. They do get pretty big, and again, if you're gonna get an Indonesian, they do require that higher level of humidity that can be difficult. So I personally wouldn't recommend them to a beginner, but as for handleability, they definitely do calm down over time. You just have to be patient. You just have to keep working with them. There are many other lizards that are just much easier to handle, in my opinion. But if you keep working with them, then they can definitely calm down. My friend Shasa like carries hers around and it cuddles with her all day. So I mean, it's possible. Mine is just a little bit more difficult also because it was wild caught. So again, that's another reason you definitely want to go for a captive bred animal. So that's it for blue-tongued skinks. I hope that this was helpful. Leave a comment, let me know what you think. I'm gonna leave you guys with watching Chancho eat his very first quail egg, which is adorable. So thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful day. This is Chancho's enclosure right now, and it's pretty long. You do not need a lot of height for a blue-tongued skink. They are not climbers. They just go on the ground. There's Chancho right there. I do have the UVB and then the heat right on top. And he usually just goes on top of that log and just basks all day. And then there's a lot of foliage and things around the enclosure. His water bowl is right up front here. And then he has cork bark throughout the entire enclosure. It's kind of hard to see, but he crawls under that for many different types of hides wherever he wants to go. And I also again use the Eco Earth substrate, and it works out perfectly for him.